Welcome everyone again to another episode of the ideaXme show, the show that profiles the humans behind the big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future and future creators. And for all those that like great stories, I'm Ira Pastor, your life sciences ambassador, along for the journey today. So the Born Free Foundation is an international wildlife charity that campaigns to keep wildlife in the wild. It was founded by English actors and wildlife campaigners Will Travers and Virginia McKenna, and its mission is to protect wild animals in their natural habitat, campaigns against the keeping of wild animals in captivity, and rescues wild animals in need. It also promotes compassionate conservation, which ultimately takes into account the welfare of individual animals and conservation initiatives. Born Free's head office is located in West Sussex, southeast England. It also has offices in Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Africa, with representatives in both Sri Lanka and Australia. And Born Free manages or funds projects in more than 20 countries around the world, across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Focuses on 9 working priorities, including captive wild animal exploitation, trophy and canned hunting, wildlife trade, rescue care, rehabilitation and release, human-wildlife coexistence and conservation, integrated wildlife protection, transboundary programs, UK wildlife protection, and education. Born Free also has its own sanctuaries. It has 2 big cats rescue centers, one located in South Africa, the other in Ethiopia, and a tiger sanctuary located in India. And we're honored today to be joined by Will Travers, who is English director, writer, broadcaster, animal rights activist, and happens to be son of Will Travers and Virginia McKenna. He is currently the president of the Born Free Foundation, Born Free USA, the Species Survival Network, and has also been decorated as an officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. Will, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today and talk to us for a little while.
Ira, it's my pleasure. How nice to meet you virtually.
Definitely. Same here. So, typically we start off by giving our guests the floor for a little while. If you could sort of take us back to the beginning, back to sort of the mid-1960s when you first traveled with your parents to Kenya and were involved in some of the sort of the early filmmaking that was involved in sort of the early genesis of this whole idea. I think that makes her a wonderful introduction.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you're right. Goodness me, it's a long time ago now. But so in the mid-60s, my mother and father, Virginia and Bill, were asked if they'd like to be in what was called at the time a sort of docudrama. It's just going to be a little film. It's going to be no big deal. And it's about lions and you're going to have to work with a lion, but don't worry, they're like a big pussycat and it's going to be fine. And it was just such an adventure. I know that they both jumped at the chance, husband and wife acting team. And they took the family along for nearly a year to Kenya while the film was being made. And the film was Born Free. It's based on the famous book by Joy Adamson, who in turn based the book on the diaries that her husband, George, had written. And Joy was very busy promoting her subsequent books, so she wasn't around as much, but George was there every single day. And my mum and dad learned a great deal from him. One of the most important things they learned was that wild animals are individuals. They have individual personalities, characteristics, traits, likes and dislikes. And they had to work with, well, in total, there were 20 lions used on the film, but they had to work closely with about 7. And so they had to get to know those animals very well because contrary to what they've been told, these weren't big pussycats. These are potentially very dangerous animals, and you can go about your working relationship with them in one of 2 ways. You can either intimidate and bully the animal into submission so that it does what you want when you want it through fear, or you can take the route that, of course, they took, which George promoted, which is one based on fun and games and trust. And I don't know if, people listening to this, have seen the film, probably many of them have over the years, but there's a couple of really crucial scenes in that film that stand out for me. They're not the big the big set pieces, there's one where my dad is in the bathroom and he's washing his face in his pajamas, and he reaches round for the towel, and the lioness playing Elsa has the towel in her teeth. He has soap in his eyes and he's reaching round, grappling for this towel. Now, it's a comedy scene, but the trust that you have to have that that animal is going to go along with the game and is not going to become unhappy or cross or resentful that you're trying to take the towel away, it's a pretty profound level of trust, because it can all go so wrong. And in fact, not that it was the lion's fault, but my mum tells the story of when she and dad were out early morning, every morning. They used to walk with the lions for 2 hours, particularly the lion that they were going to be working with that day, out on the open plains. There's nobody around. You know, nowadays there would be 5 security people and 3 guys with guns and, I don't know, a drone or whatever. But in those days, just the 2 of them with, in this case, 2 lions, a male and a female, boy and girl. And mum says, well, they'd started to want to have us play a game, a stalking game, because there was some Thompson's gazelle, a small prey animal, in the distance. They weren't going to go and kill this animal, but they wanted to play stalking. And mum could sense they wanted the humans to get down on their level and crawl through the grass. So there they are, 2 adults and 2 lions crawling through the grass playing this game. And my mum says, you know, my knees were really hurting. This is really prickly stuff. So I stood up, and by standing up, she broke the spell. The game was over, and one of the lions, the male, turned to look at her, and he was very unhappy that she'd broken this game. And he came towards her, and there is an extraordinary photograph that my dad took, goodness knows what he was thinking, of a lion just literally leaping into midair. My mum's hands are up, but because he hits her, he breaks her leg, he takes her down to the ground. And then my dad remembered that they'd really enjoyed another game, which was wiggle the shirt through the grass game. Okay. So he took off his shirt and he wiggled it through the grass, distracted the lions, got them into the Land Rover, went back, picked up my mum in his arms, and then she went off to Nairobi to hospital, where she had to have her leg set. It could have gone, it didn't go right. No. But you can imagine it could have gone far worse.
Surely.
And again, it's that level of trust. And he did not, it wasn't a situation of resentment. It was just, he spoiled the game. So anyway, that experience of making the film got them to understand a little bit about wild animals. And it was years later that we set up what was an organization to look into the plight of animals in zoos, in captivity, as you've mentioned. And beyond that, what we want to do instead of that, which is to keep wildlife in the wild. And we've been doing that. I was a co-founder in 1984, so we've been doing it for 36 years.
And obviously, you know, when you go to the Born Free website, you have quite a long list of priorities. I have a shorter list here that we're going to talk about, but I was just wondering, could you, so, you know, you set up in 1984, it was renamed Born Free in 1991. Could you just talk a little bit about the team, the supporters? I know you have celebrities and corporate sponsors and artists and so forth. And also, when you have so many priorities, sort of, what's the process for setting these priorities? Because it is a kind of wide berth that you have, from sort of the exploitation, the education, obviously, some of the other areas in terms of the wildlife trade and legislation. Talk us a little bit about what's involved in running and managing the organization.
It's fascinating, apart from anything else, and I find it exciting. I mean, literally every day there is something new. Just before we got talking, I was on a webinar organized by United for Wildlife, which is the charity that Prince William has established, and we were talking about bushmeat, the eating of wild meat, the killing of wild animals and their commercial scale consumption, which is actually driving some species to the brink. So every day is different, every day is amazing. I have the most fantastic team, whether it's in policy or education, conservation, or rescue and care and welfare. I also have an amazing team in our sister organization based in the United States, Born Free USA, which just by way of example, has been campaigning strenuously to protect the Endangered Species Act, to stop it being eviscerated because it's under threat, also to tackle, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but there are hundreds of wildlife refuges, national wildlife refuges, under the auspices of the US Fish and Wildlife Department in the States. And I didn't know that you can trap on 38% of them. You can set lethal traps in a place that's called a wildlife refuge. You don't have to even identify where you've set them. So if I was a citizen near one of these refuges and I decided to take my dog for a walk along a trail and get some beautiful fresh air in this difficult time, there's a chance that my dog is going to get hit by a dreadful body gripping or maiming trap. And in fact, you know, it happens. It's on my social media feed at the moment. Similarly, in the States, we have the biggest primate rescue center in the States. We have 450 primates at our rescue center in Texas, and these have come from roadside menageries, private owners who've kind of realized that this isn't a child. This is a little monkey that they have, and that is not the same. They've been confiscated by the authorities. So, I mean, I'm not really answering exactly this point, but I see so many opportunities for us to ultimately change human behavior.
Sure.
Whether that is through advocating wildlife-friendly policies, fighting the ivory trade, the rhino horn trade, whatever it happens to be, whether it's through campaigning against trophy hunting, because we cannot see that as a positive contributor to conservation, and there are some welfare concerns, dreadful welfare concerns, or even worse, canned hunting, which we may want to explore later.
Absolutely.
Whether it's through advocating against traditional circuses with animals and zoos with animals and saying, seriously, we've been experimenting. If you want to call the zoo an experiment in public education and conservation, it's gone on for at least 160 years, or more than that. The London Zoo started in 1828, 1827, and kind of we've got to, any experiment needs to be reevaluated, and we need to ask ourselves the question, is this the best we can do? Because quite frankly, the natural world needs the best we can do right now. Second best is not going to be good enough. So it's all these different things, and at the heart of everything is the individual animal, which goes to that point you made about compassionate conservation. You know, if it's conservation, what's the impact on the individual? If it's care and rescue, how do we make sure that the individual animal's welfare is guaranteed? If it's education, how can we treat individual children as our educators of the future? And how can they become the advocates for the planet as we move forward? The key thing for us has to be that individual.
Obviously, a big focus, as you were just saying, is whether we're talking about zoos, aquarium, circuses, there is, of which there's thousands, here across the United States and worldwide. And this issue, we can never recreate the sort of the complexity of nature in these environments, and as a result, animals suffer. And you have this interesting term, I've never heard it before, but we can talk about this zoochosis, which is this stereotypical behavior that apparently has no function, this repetitive thing that animals do. I think on the website you focus on a bear, but I'm just very interested in this, as it is a form of depression and stress. Is this seen across? Is this only seen in mammals? Do you see this in dolphins and fish and other amphibians? And is this a talk a little bit more about this, because we don't typically, obviously, I'm taking my kids. We have actually the oldest zoo in the United States here in Philadelphia. And maybe we don't think about these things when we're looking at the tiger walk back and forth.
Yeah.
kids think animals are cute. But walk through some of these psychological issues here that you're analyzing with regard to these animals. And
Sure. So I think we're if we've got half a brain, we do get what physical suffering is. You know, we can say, well, the animal should have clean water to drink.
Right.
The animal should not be injured. It should not be in poor condition. It should get good food and all the rest of it. We can understand physical suffering, but it's only, I'd say, relatively recently that we've begun to really think about the psychological suffering that animals must endure because of the captive environments that they're compelled to live in. And it was my father in the early 90s who coined the term zoochosis or zoochotic, because we understand psychosis in human beings, but we didn't, and now it is actually a widely used term, we didn't have a term that was specifically designed to describe behaviors seemingly pointless behaviors. They're not actually pointless, but seemingly pointless behaviors in animals in zoos. And it isn't just mammals, it is birds, it is reptiles, it can be manifested in all animals. And I say it's not pointless because what it actually is an adaptive mechanism to cope with the deprivation of the physical environment, the environment that the animal must endure. So it is what you also see in humans, where somebody has suffered extreme trauma or lives in a very sterile and barren environment. And what that person does, and we've talked to clinical psychologists here about how human beings retreat into themselves and create this other world where they feel kind of comfortable and safe because they've excluded the real world that surrounds them. So if you look at people in institutions where people have mental challenges, you'll see those same behaviors, the rocking behavior, the repetitive pacing behavior, talking to oneself behavior the whole time, what we would regard perhaps as nervous tics, you know, that continual of doing something all the time. And it seems pointless and functional, but what it is it creates an envelope in which that human being finds at least some security and comfort. And we believe that it's the same with animals in deprived captive circumstances. Very, very hard to break that pattern of behavior once it's become established. And also because when people go to the zoo, and you may have experienced this, you tend to stay in front of enclosures for a relatively short space of time. You pull up at the enclosure, you look in, you look, where's the animal? You see the animal, you talk to your partner or your child, or you go, okay, yeah, he's climbing up the back, and then you look around and nothing much else is going on. So a minute or two, and you kind of move on. You're not there long enough to observe the pattern of that behavior.
Got it.
And it is the pattern that is the giveaway. The dark mark on the wall at the back of the enclosure, which seems out of place, is in fact the place where that animal, after a circuit round the enclosure, comes and rubs, and then goes off on the circuit and comes back and rubs. And it's that begins to give you the insight into these fixated behavioral stereotypies that these animals are displaying, and which we kind of miss because we're only in the zoo for 2 or 3 hours. So we go to 50 or 60 enclosures. I mean, you can do the math. You're only gonna be in front of an enclosure for a couple of minutes.
No, I never thought about it from this perspective, but it's very intriguing and eye-opening when you take a step back and you do think about that.
Have a look next time, Ira. Just see if there is something. I mean, I went to the Central Park Zoo not that long ago, and there was a seal in a pool, sort of rock feature in the middle, and the seal would blow the same pattern of bubbles down to a point on the floor of the pool, and would come up in exactly the same place, would breathe, would flip over, would swim on its back all the way down to another point, dive again, same pattern of bubbles, came up, and you just sit there for half an hour and you can see this behavior. Sometimes breaks for a minute or two, but then comes back into that. And I will tell you something, was involved in rescuing a dolphin years ago from a UK dolphinarium, and his pool when he was in captivity was about 20 foot by 12, something like that.
Okay.
So not a big pool by any means. We took him to the Caribbean and we put him into an 80-acre lagoon with a net across it, and he found a little bulge in the net over a slightly deeper area, which measured approximately 20 foot by 12. And he spent 3 days just in that little area because he'd become agoraphobic.
Sure.
He just didn't know what was beyond his mental prison. And then he went out just for an hour and came back in and sort of like picked up his comfort blanket again and swam in that pattern. And then the next time he went out, he swam a kilometer, so 1,000 meters in a straight line, which he'd never done since he was caught from the wild. And it's just like, wow, it must be both exhilarating and also terrifying for an animal that has had its world defined by us so precisely and for so long, to suddenly have that degree of freedom. And ultimately, I should say, he and 2 others that we rescued were released back into the wild, so they had the full opportunity to express themselves as wild dolphins once more.
And there, it seems in that particular case that you were able to revitalize the dolphin in what seems like a relatively short period of time. Are there? Have you seen more severe cases where it's, I don't know, impossible, but where it's just not?
Oh no! It took 6 months.
Oh, okay.
To get him and the 2 dolphins that arrived a short while later, about 6 weeks later, ready for release. And then we did this again with 2 dolphins in the Mediterranean about 7 or 8 years ago, and they took over a year. And part of the challenge is that in captivity in a traditional dolphinarium, the animal is fed dead fish, and it's forced to eat dead. Dolphins don't usually eat dead fish. They usually hunt for live fish, but in captivity, you force them, and I mean force them, to eat dead fish. And once they become, frankly, lazy and acclimatized to the fact that it's just dead fish and you just better like it because there ain't nothing else, then breaking that back again and having the animal realize that actually I'm not going to get dead fish, it gets less and less dead fish, and it get more and more you have to work for the fish in these big lagoons that we created. That's why it takes so long. They have to build up muscle tone. They have to become hunters again. They have to change a behavior pattern that's been enforced on them for perhaps 20 years and revert to their wild nature. All of that can take a great deal of time and a dedicated team who are there 24/7.
Moving to the theme of the wildlife trade, which staggeringly, looking at these figures, when you exclude the trafficking of timber and fish, you still have a $20 billion a year business here going on. We talked a little bit on a previous episode with the folks from the band Trophy Hunting organization, specifically focusing on that angle here. But as you were pointing out, there's all these other areas: bushmeat, obviously the exotic pets, the pseudo sort of scientific ethnomedicinal stuff in regards to rhinoceros horns and what have you. Talk a little bit, if you would, about sort of what you're doing on the legislative front here in some of these different areas. And also, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because it seems like technology is getting into the point where we see some groups trying to at least, I don't know, sort of put up some type of stopgap using some modern tools. I saw a company a couple of weeks ago that was actually trying to cell culture rhino horns for the Asian market to as an alternative to try to limit the demand for this stuff. That one's a little. Yeah, but talk a little bit of that, if you would, if you think there's some interesting, or you see any interesting sort of technological opportunities here as it comes to reducing or limiting the demand side of the equation here.
Sure. Well, so the first thing to say is that the sort of global trade in wildlife products is largely governed by rules established under the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. So it's called CITES. And there are 183 countries who are parties to that UN convention. Born Free's been part of the official observers to CITES since 1989. I've been to every conference of the parties since that time, and I think there's probably only about 5 of us left who've done that. And I've observed over this extended 30-year period of time a growing realization that we can't simply continue to consume the world's wildlife and paper over the cracks in terms of sustainability and think that we can do that forever. So I think slowly, and it needs to be much more speedily done, we need to adjust our thinking so that we no longer treat the world's natural resources, including its animals and its plants, as a kind of open resource that we can all dip into at any time we want without consequences. And you'll be aware that there is a day in the year, I think it's called a Global Overreach Day. And it is the day when the resources that the world produces each year have been used up by humanity. And then we're eating into the capital. So the world produces stuff, that's true, the natural world produces stuff, and we use it, but at some stage we've used up everything that it produced for that year, and we're starting to eat into the capital. And this year, I believe it was the 20th of August. So the moment we got past the 20th of August, so about a month ago, we were eating into the capital. And it's getting earlier and earlier each year until, you know, logically speaking, there will be no overreach day. We will be overreaching permanently because we have not learned as a species to restrain our massive desire to consume at all costs. And it is at all costs. We are pushing the planet beyond its ability to look after us and everything else that's on it. But we've been working on wildlife trade issues, whether it's ivory or rhino horn or tiger skins or pangolin scales or tree species or marine species for, I say, a long time. And I think that what tends to happen is two things. Firstly, the policies that come out of CITES are broadly well implemented by those countries that can afford to implement them. So the rich North and West, effectively. And the poorer South and East can't afford to do it. And we seem to be, for some bizarre reason, reluctant to take a sort of investment approach to this, where we would invest in nature and the capacity of those countries that actually tend to have the majority of the natural world and the majority of species still within their care and their stewardship. We seem to be reluctant to invest in those countries. And the pandemic that we're all experiencing now sort of is a case in point. You know, the pandemic has tragically ended the life of around 1 million people that we know of. And we've had 30 million people infected, which is going to have debilitating consequences on many of them for the rest of their lives. And it's cost something north of 16 trillion US dollars to try and fix the social impact, the economic impact, to, you know, to pay people to stay at home, please don't come to work because the risk of infection, etc., etc. All the stuff that the US government is wrestling with, whether it's in the Senate or in the House, all the stuff that the UK government, the Italian, the German, the French, we're all wrestling with those issues of trying to, whatever it is, strike the balance. But the actual cost, 16 trillion US dollars. And it just seems to me extraordinary that we know pretty well for sure that this infection came from a reservoir of infection, of a COVID reservoir in bats, that it was almost certainly passed to a pangolin in a wildlife market, and that pangolin went into the human food chain, or was handled and moved between, and the infection spread. It seems extraordinary to me that we will spend something that is 8 times the size of the British economy in trying to fix the problem afterwards,
Yep.
instead of considering what do we need to do to invest in protection of nature, food security for rural populations in developing countries, really good sort of track and trace so that we don't exploit animals to their very extinction, and we do not create circumstances which allow a pandemic to manifest itself, to flourish. On that call that I was mentioning earlier, the one that I have just come off about an hour and a half ago, someone said, someone who's far more qualified than I am said, do you know what, the next pandemic, if we don't get this right, is going to be far worse than COVID-19.
Yeah.
And you just think, how could it be? I mean, yeah, I guess in sort of growth, total number of people who die, total number of people infected, but this has shaken the planet
Yep.
to its core. And many people are asking the question, they're saying, I don't want to go back to business as usual, but they're not saying what not going back to business as usual actually means. What do they mean? What do we mean by that? People say build back better, which is a slogan I happen to love, but what does build back better mean? What are the actual strategies that sit behind the soundbite that allows us to understand that we can't continue, as Mark Ruffalo, the actor, said? He said, we have to get rid of this idea of disposable travel. And by that he means people who think that it's kind of okay to live in LA and fly to New York every other week to their Manhattan apartment and party and then fly back again. 25, 30, 50 flights a year. The world can't sustain that. People who continue to think that it's okay to just commute, 2 hours to work each day, 2 hours back each day in the car. And it's not their fault. It's the structure of work that we've created that requires them to carry out this, frankly, pretty pointless exercise, not for everybody, but for many, many people. And I'll tell you that Born Free here in the UK, we've decided there is no more office. That's it. The office will be permanently shut for us on the 30th of December. And our team will work from home and they will be supported from home. There will be meeting opportunities, but no longer will there be that kind of 9 to 5 daily commute that gets people in and gets people out. We will change the way we do it, and we will cut our international air travel by approximately 70%. Because we truly want to do the right thing, try and work out what the future holds. And I'm very pleased to say that earlier this year, we were awarded the gold standard by Carbon Neutral Now, which is a UN registered scheme. So we are a carbon neutral wildlife and animal charity, and I think we're the only one in the world at the moment.
What can we do about the benefits? And I'll go into a little more detail. Obviously, here I am quarantining here on the East Coast of the United States. I do get to travel occasionally. I don't get to too many. I'm not going to be in Indonesia or Uganda or Brazil anytime soon. Obviously, I have a zoo nearby, but I feel bad. You made me feel bad about it, but that's okay. It's good.
No, inquiring about it, inquiring.
Exactly, and a pretty decent aquarium across the river. But that being said, is there a mid-ground somewhere? Because, and what comes to mind, and bear with me, and then I'll let you take this. We did an episode on the benefits of the human-animal bond recently, and this had to do more with companion animals, where troubled children, prisoners. Animals teach us lots of things too, being around them, empathy, compassion. We learn a lot more from animals than we do sometimes our human counterparts. I have to believe there's some benefit to the dolphin and the lion down the street here. What is the mid ground for someone like, I mean, I'm not going to be in the savannah, but I think there's some benefit there to that exposure. What can we do? What's the mid ground for all of us so that we can still, we are one of 9 million species on this planet, and there needs to be some interaction beyond the dog and the cat and the parrot. What are some solutions here?
Yeah, although I think that what we have done over the last 100 or so years is we've assumed a series of rights, rights of proximity,
Sure.
rights to move animals that we would never encounter
Right.
In our normal lives into the zoo down the street, or into the circus, or into the dolphinarium. And I think we have to, as a starting point, re-educate ourselves to think that this isn't a right, sure, and that we have assumed it, any more than, you know, you or I will say, well, you know, I have the right to go to the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the great, and we would never consider bringing them here. There is only one place you can see the pyramids in Egypt, sure, and that is in Egypt. So, absolutely, you know, that's the reality of it. And maybe we should learn something from that. The second thing I'd say is that our own natural spaces in our own countries are often massively underappreciated and underfunded. And I think that we have to get behind our own nature, our own wildlife, and make sure that that is properly protected and not, you know, vulnerable to decisions by others that open it up for mineral exploration or some form of extraction, or sure, for development of some kind. You know, these are precious places, and we need to treat them with the reverence and respect that they deserve. So I think that that's really important. The other thing is that nature itself, so it's not always about the animal interaction, but nature itself has become recognized, I think particularly just in the last 5 to 10 years, as having massive mental health benefits. Sure. Being in nature just makes us feel good about ourselves, good about our friends and family, good about the world as a whole, and we need to embrace that. And then there are the times when, you know, for storytelling purposes, we want to show a relationship. Well, we've now got the technology that allows us to tell fantastical stories with wild animal characters that no longer require real animals to be involved in the process. So were Born Free to come along today, the story of the movie and the book, it would not be made with real wild animals. We would be able to create that story in another, I think, fascinating and important way. So in New Zealand right now, there is a robotic dolphin that has been made by, he was one of the former guys at Disney. Okay. Former vice president. And he and a team have created this robotic dolphin, which is so lifelike that you can't tell. In fact, I looked at it on screen. I'm not in New Zealand. I looked at it and I said, no way, it's got to be real. I mean, every glisten, every fold of the skin, every sinuous movement in the water just speaks real dolphin. And it isn't. It's a $20 million individual. Wow. Technology can help us in some respects. I'm not a big fan of just saying tech will fix it, because you mentioned those synthesized rhino horn products that they've been trying to patent in China. It will do no good for rhinos, because it is not a substitute. It's the kind of it's a fake substitute, and we know from consumer research that consumers will pay premium for the real stuff, the real bear bile, the real bear gallbladders, the real tiger wine, the real rhino horn. They will pay over the odds for those things. So it's really more about educating consumers to step away Step away entirely from the process. Sometimes that's done in a country where if the president says do it, everyone does. So like China, if the president says just we're not doing it, then that impact is massive. It's more of a nudge theory in Western democracies, but it still can be done.
Any upcoming projects, conferences you're going to, anything hot, breaking news that you might want to talk about? Well, I know you're probably not traveling too much nowadays.
I'm not going to be traveling. No, I'm not going to be traveling too much. But I'll tell you that I have some what I think is actually really good news, and then there's a sort of extra part to it.
Sure.
And that is we've been working on conservation of lions in Kenya, wild lions in Kenya, for many years. In fact, in 2009, we held a big exhibition of lion sculptures, fiberglass hand-painted lion sculptures on the streets of Nairobi. And with that exhibition came the information that there are only 2,000 wild lions left in Kenya. And there are only 20,000 wild lions left in Africa, which is pretty shocking. You know, people talk a lot about elephants, and I'm huge advocate for elephants. There are 400,000 wild elephants in Africa. There are 20,000 wild lions. And at that time, 2,000 in Kenya. And then only 2 weeks ago, the latest government report, supported by all the different entities and charities and NGOs and research institutions, showed that we're just nudging 2,500 lions in Kenya. This is in a country that when I was there as a child, in the mid-60s, it had about 9 million people living in it. And today it has 53 million people living in it. So even with that huge human population pressure and pressure on resources that has exploded in my lifetime, Kenya has still managed to grow its lion population. It's doubled its elephant population since 1989. You know, these things can be done if we all really think about it and work together. And then sort of bringing it back home in a sense, excitingly, we've teamed up with two outstanding artists, sculptors from Australia, Gilly and Mark, famous for their rhino sculptures on the streets of New York, the huge life-size, one on top of another rhino sculptures that they've created. And they're going to do a lion installation, 5 adults and 20 cubs, which we are subject to finding the right place and getting a bit of sponsorship, but we're going to put on the streets of London and get people excited about lions in a way that they, and the great thing about these sculptures is that they're indestructible. I don't care if 1,000 kids, social distancing permitting, can climb over them and sit on them and have their photograph taken with them and stroke them and just feel connected and talk in wonderful ways about this amazing species that, thank goodness, we still have. Therefore, we still have the opportunity to protect and save for the future.
Wonderful to hear that. And both the installation, but also the trends in Kenya, because as I was saying with the previous show on the trophy hunting, there were some scary figures there. So that's nice. That's nice to hear.
Really, and Kenya has no trophy hunting, so you know, good for them. And if you want that lion installation in Philadelphia or New York, you know, just find me the sponsor. I'll bring it over.
I will try to work on that.
Okay.
Well, coming back to you, obviously, you know, you've had in this whole process, you've had the opportunity to meet quite a few fascinating people, from the sponsors and the celebrities and the youth ambassadors and so forth that you work with. Clearly, your parents were very influential in crafting your interests and your passion for this, as were, you know, Elsa the tiger cub, Paul the elephant. Other important influencers, mentors, teachers along the way that you might want to mention, shout out to at this point, that really have continued to light this interest and passion in what you do?
I should say, you know, you're saying that, and I'm trying to think, because there's so
I'm sure
I've been
there's a
so
lot.
lucky. I've met so many extraordinary individuals over the years, from, you know, David Attenborough to Jane
Sure.
Goodall to George Adamson himself, Cynthia Moss, who runs the Amboseli Elephant project, and she's New Yorker, and David Suzuki, not in person, but when he was Ed Stewart, who runs the Elephant Orphanage Rescue Center, I should say, in California. He has an amazing setup there where he cares for elephants that have come from circuses and zoos, and, you know, he gives them the best possible life that I can kind of imagine for a captive elephant, given that they're never going back to the wild. I have some, not just old heroes, I have some young heroes too. I mean, there's a young lady, Muslim lady, conservationist working in Kenya. Her name's Rabia Hawa, and she's just like as brave as it gets. I mean, extraordinary stuff. She puts on her ranger uniform and she heads off into parts of the country that I would think very much twice about heading out to, and taking on poachers and calling in the Kenya Wildlife Service and making citizens arrests. And she's
Right.
an honorary warden as well. I mean, she's pretty extraordinary. I have a good friend here in the UK called Bella Lack. I first met Bella when she was 15. She's now 17. She is a social media phenomenon. She has the ear of the government. She's sort of a bit Greta Thunberg,
Okay.
she's like so articulate and so smart and so bright, and is the inspiration for her people. I mean, if your people listening to this want to look up Bella Lack on Twitter or Rabia Hawa on Instagram, follow some people who are not will be the next leaders, who are the next leaders, and who old guys like me now follow, because we have to think differently.
Absolutely.
I haven't got 30 years more. When I started this with my mum and dad in 1984, we thought actually that we would see the end of sort of traditional captive exploitation of animals within 10 years. Haha, here we are, 3.5 decades later, older, definitely, wiser, I hope, but also we just don't have another 30 years to do this. I will be cavorting with the worms by then. And what I need to feel is that the next generation are not waiting for the baton to be passed, but have already picked up the baton and are running faster than I'm running to keep up now. And I think that's exciting. That's kind of one of the things that gets me out of bed in the morning.
I have to say the story of people like Bella Lack and some of the other younger minds that we've profiled on the show, these teenagers, sometimes almost less than teenagers. It shows that they're out there, and this is not something that takes decades for them to learn. Kids have, I can't exactly describe what it is, but they haven't been shackled by the institutions and have their
Not at all. Not at all. And I think that there's a real degree of bravery in all of this, because it's very easy to feel dismissed and marginalized when you're 14, 15. You know, you're in a time when you're still trying to work out who you are.
Right.
And if people start yelling at you that you're a presumptuous kid, and kids should be seen but not heard, and the rest of it, and yet for all the criticism that they get, those thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids who say, I'm going to go to the streets and I need my voice to be heard, whether it's part of climate rebellion or extinction rebellion, or we're going to, on that Friday, we're going to be there missing school. So with our own knowledge, forfeiting a day of education in the formal sense, because we need to educate the world in the real sense about our fears for the future. I've met so many people now who are going, do you know, I'm not sure I'm going to have kids. And you say, well, I'm just sort of, but why? And they go, because I just don't know what kind of world I'm going to be bringing a life into, and what that will mean for that child and for me and for the planet. I'm just not sure that that there is a future. And I'm thinking, we have 10 years to fix this, everyone. We have 10 years to fix it. Not 50 years, not 30. We have 10 years to fix it. And we're going to need all sorts of leaders, political leaders, business leaders, cultural leaders, faith leaders, and kids and scientists and conservationists from every possible interest group in the world to step up and say, we have one last chance to get this right. Because the pandemic, we were like a juggernaut running to the edge of a cliff, and the pandemic has put the brakes on so that this juggernaut has stopped a few feet away from the edge. Now we can either rev up the engine, go back to business as usual, pump the gas back into the air and then go over the edge and take everything with us, and we'll have a glorious last 40 or 50 years of life on Earth, and then it'll be Armageddon. Or we can reverse gear, step away from the edge, and think profoundly about how we can, I think Gandhi said it, there's enough in the world for the needs of all, but not for the greed of one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's absolutely right.
Yep.
And we are the greedy species.
That we are. Yeah, we are. And that's a excellent way to wrap up, and a wonderful rallying call for everyone to, to realize. And I think you put it in great perspective, especially with what we're sitting through today as a sort of a smack in the face that, hey, you might not think about it, but little things can really shake this up. And if we're not heeding these messages, it's not going to be the future that we so desire. So I really appreciate that message, Will, and really wishing you the best with this, and anything else we can do, anyone else that we can profile on coming shows, I'd love to do it, because it's such an important topic.
Well, thank you very much, Ira. I mean, if people are interested, if any of this has touched a nerve, take a look at the Born Free website, take a look at the Born Free USA website if they want to see what we're doing in the States. And if I had one request to every single person, is that the worst thing you can do is to do nothing.
Yep.
Is to stay silent, is to sit on your hands and not raise your hand. And now we need everyone to raise their hand.
For everybody that is going to be watching on the YouTube channel or listening on the various podcast networks, you've been listening to Will Travers, president of the Born Free Foundation, Born Free USA, and the Species Survival Network. Will, thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Thank you for everything you're doing. And as we say, thank you for moving the human story forward, but thank you for also moving the lion and the dolphin and all
well
9 other species forward. It was a real pleasure having you today.
It was my privilege to be on the show. Thank you.
Thanks so much.